The decision to have separate finances seemed perfectly reasonable and modern to Mark. He had no idea what a commotion it would cause in his family. When his mother, Susan, came to visit and swung open the fridge door, her indignation knew no bounds. "Mark, why is the fridge empty? Where's the food?" She bustled around the kitchen, completely bewildered, while her beloved son turned to his wife, baffled. "Darling, why haven't you cooked anything for Mom's arrival?" Hello, dear listeners. I'm pleased to welcome you to my channel. I present to you a new and interesting story. Enjoy listening. Susan couldn't stand long train journeys, but visiting her son always meant taking one. She didn't own a car, and a taxi to their countryside home was incredibly expensive. She was already looking forward to stepping through the door, taking off those awful shoes that had rubbed her heels, and sitting down at the table, where Sarah, her daughter-in-law, would surely have already laid out plates of homemade pies, salads, and a hot meal. Sarah always welcomed her mother-in-law lavishly, cooking as if she were expecting not just one person but an entire delegation. The door was opened by Mark, her only son. He hugged her and kissed her cheek. Susan walked into the hallway, took off her jacket, and looked around. The flat was clean and smelled fresh, but not of food. Strange, she thought. Usually, the aroma of fried onions, baked goods, or stewed meat greets me right at the door. "Where's Sarah?" she asked, heading to the kitchen. "Sarah's in the bedroom. She'll be out in a minute," Mark replied, a little uncertainly. Susan pushed open the kitchen door and froze. On the table sat an empty fruit bowl. The hob was immaculately clean. She walked over to the fridge, pulled open the door, and gasped. Inside, all she found was a bottle of ketchup, a packet of butter, and a lonely cucumber that clearly was nearing its end. "Mark, why is the fridge empty? Where's the food?" Her voice rang out with indignation. Mark stood in the doorway, scratching the back of his head, looking vaguely to the side. "Well, Mom, you see, Sarah and I decided to switch to a separate budget." Susan's eyes widened. "What's separate budget?" "Well, it's modern, isn't it? I spend my money on myself, and she spends hers on herself. Nobody owes anyone anything. It's all fair." Susan felt her blood begin to boil. She rushed around the kitchen, opening cupboards, peering into pots. Everywhere was empty. No cereals, no pasta, no bread. It was as if no one even lived in this flat. "Are you serious?" She turned to her son. "You've been married for 8 years. You have a child. What's separate budget?" "Mom, it's my decision." Sarah agreed. Mark was starting to get annoyed. Just then, Sarah came out of the bedroom. She was wearing jogging bottoms and a stretched-out t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face was expressionless, calm, almost indifferent. "Hello, Susan," she said in an even tone. "Sarah, darling." Susan rushed towards her. "What's happened? Why is there no food in the house?" "I arrived hungry. I thought you'd be cooking as usual." "Darling, why haven't you cooked anything for Mom's arrival?" Mark interrupted, looking at his wife with a hint of reproach. And then Sarah looked at him in such a way that even Susan involuntarily stepped back. "Because my budget is for Leo and me," she replied quietly but very clearly. "I buy groceries for 2. Leo and I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You said yourself that now it's every man for himself. So, I'm for myself and for the child, who, by the way, is also mine." Mark's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "What do you mean, for 2? He mumbled. "That's exactly what I mean. You wanted a separate budget. You got it. I spend my salary on groceries for Leo and me, on his clothes, his clubs, his doctors, on everything else too. Your salary is yours, mine is mine. It's fair, isn't it?" Susan slowly sank onto a chair. She suddenly realized something serious had happened here, but she hadn't yet grasped the full extent of the disaster. "Wait," Mark said, nervously running a hand over his face. "I didn't say I wouldn't eat at home at all." "But you said you would," Sarah retorted. "You said separate budgets. I took it literally. If you want to eat my food, let's discuss how much you're willing to contribute to the shared pot. I've calculated that for 3 of us, it's roughly £500 a month, give or take. If you want to eat with us, chip in. Half of that, around £250. Mark paled. "Are you out of your mind? This is my flat. The mortgage still has 10 years left, and I pay exactly half of it," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "So don't even start. The flat is shared, and we pay equally." But I buy the food myself because you decided we now have separate budgets. Sarah, darling. Susan intervened, trying to smooth things over. What's gotten into you? Men have always been providers, but that doesn't mean. Susan, Sarah interrupted her, her voice turning to steel. It's your son who decided to play at emancipation. I'm just playing along. He earns £2,000. I earn £1,500. Before, we put everything into a joint account, and I managed the household, bought groceries, cooked, washed, cleaned, looked after Leo, and he sat playing his computer games in the evenings. Then he announced he wanted a separate budget. I agreed. Now I spend my money only on myself and our son. And do you know what? I've even started being able to save. Mark stood there, red as a beetroot. That's not what I meant. What did you mean, then? Sarah asked in an icy tone. That I would continue to manage the entire household, and you would save up for a new computer? A heavy, oppressive silence hung in the air. Susan looked at her son, then at her daughter-in-law, and a picture began to form in her mind. She suddenly saw everything differently. Sarah had always been a good wife, house-proud, and caring. And Mark? Mark apparently thought he could get away with it and come out on top. But Mum's here. Mark tried to play on her sympathy. Then you feed your mum, Sarah shrugged. I didn't invite you. I didn't even know Susan was coming. You didn't tell me. What do you mean, you didn't invite her? She's my mother. Your mother, your responsibility, your money. Separate budgets. Remember? Susan felt the ground give way beneath her. She had always thought Sarah was compliant, easygoing. And now this girl had shown her true colors. And the most annoying thing was, she was absolutely right. Fine, I'll go to the shop now. Mark grumbled and reached for his jacket. The nearest one closes at 10, Sarah called after him. You'll make it if you run. Mark slammed the door. Susan remained sitting in the kitchen, feeling unwanted and superfluous. Sarah poured herself some tea and took out some biscuits from the cupboard. They were hidden behind the cereals in the very back corner. Want one? She offered her mother-in-law. Thanks, Susan mumbled and took a biscuit. They drank their tea in silence. Somewhere in the bedroom, a child's laughter could be heard. Leo was watching cartoons. A normal, cheerful child. Susan suddenly realized she didn't even know what her grandson was interested in, what he liked, what he dreamed about. She had always come to see her son and viewed Leo as an accessory to the visit. I'm sorry, she said unexpectedly. Sarah looked up. What for? I always thought you, well, that you should by default, because you're a wife. Sarah chuckled, but without malice. Everyone thinks that. Even Mark. He genuinely thought he could declare a separate budget, and I would continue to feed him, wash his socks, and iron his shirts because that's what's expected. And you decided to teach him a lesson? I decided to live honestly, Sarah corrected her. If it's a separate budget, then it's for real. I won't pretend everything is normal while I'm being taken advantage of. Susan nodded. She felt a respect for this young woman that she had never felt before. Sarah didn't throw tantrums, didn't cry, didn't threaten divorce. She simply took action and followed the rules her husband had made. Mark returned an hour later, carrying bags of frozen dumplings, sausages, and bread. His face was sour. Susan realized her son had spent a fair bit, and he didn't like it. He silently boiled the dumplings, and the three of them ate. Sarah only came out of the room to get Leo and feed him separately with her pre-prepared food. Susan watched this and felt guilty, although she didn't understand why. That night, she lay on the sofa in the living room and heard them arguing in the bedroom. Mark hissed something. Sarah replied calmly, almost emotionlessly. Susan realized it was useless to interfere. This was their battle, their rules, their life. In the morning, she left without waiting for a reconciliation. Mark saw her off to the train, gloomy and silent. Sarah didn't even come out of the room. Over the next few weeks, Susan called her son regularly. At first, he answered curtly, irritably. Then he started to complain. It turned out that Sarah was keeping her word rigidly. She only bought groceries for herself and Leo. She only cooked for the two of them. Mark tried to steal food from the fridge, but Sarah installed a separate shelf and put a combination lock on it. A real combination lock on the fridge shelf. Mom, she's gone completely wild. Mark whined into the phone. Yesterday, I ate a meatball she'd made for Leo for dinner. So she sent me a bill. She said the meatball cost £1.50, including ingredients and her labor. Susan remained silent. She didn't know what to say. On one hand, she felt sorry for her son, On the other, he had started it himself. Mark, maybe enough is enough? She suggested cautiously. Tell her you were wrong, that you want everything to go back to how it was. I told her. Mark wailed. She says a separate budget is a brilliant idea, and she's very happy with this arrangement. And you know what the most annoying thing is? She really is happy. She's become, like, happy. She walks around smiling, plays with Leo, and she doesn't even offer me a cup of tea. Can't you pour yourself a cup of tea? I can, but before, did you pay her for it? Susan asked sharply. Mark fell silent. Another month later, Sarah herself called her mother-in-law. Her voice was calm, even warm. Susan, I wanted to apologize for the reception. I was embarrassed that you went hungry. Sarah, you're not to blame for anything, Susan replied honestly. My son acted like a fool. I wanted to tell you that Mark and I have discussed everything. He agreed to go back to a joint budget. But now we have an expense sheet, and we both know where the money goes. Mark saw how much I spend on household chores, on our child, on the house. He was shocked. And what did he say? He said he didn't realize supporting a family was so expensive, Sarah chuckled. And I told him it's not expensive, it's normal. He just didn't calculate it before because I did. Susan felt pride for her daughter-in-law and shame for having once thought she was obligated to do everything simply because she was a wife. Come and visit us next weekend, Sarah offered. I'll bake a proper apple pie, just how you like it. Thank you, dear, I'll come. And Susan came. The table was richly laid. Sarah beamed with happiness. Leo ran around, laughing. Mark was quiet, thoughtful, but no longer angry. He helped his wife set the table, carried plates, wiped up spilled juice after his son. At the table, Susan raised her glass. To all of us understanding the value of care and saying thank you to those who make our lives comfortable. Sarah smiled. Mark nodded. Leo shouted, to Mom, and everyone laughed. After dinner, when Sarah was putting Leo to bed, Mark stayed with his mother in the kitchen, washing dishes thoroughly, diligently. You know, Mom, I was a complete idiot, he said, not looking up from the plate. You were, Susan agreed. I really thought a separate budget was cool and modern, that we would both be free. It turned out I just wanted to save money on my family and keep it for myself. It turned out, she nodded. Sarah saved £200 in the first month of this separate budget. Mark continued. £200. Because before, she spent it on little things for the house, on slightly more expensive groceries, on treats. But then she just stopped doing that, and a lot of money was freed up immediately. And you were left without dinner, Susan chuckled. I was left without everything, Mark confessed. I didn't even know she did so much. It turns out shirts don't iron themselves, food doesn't cook itself, the flat doesn't clean itself. Sarah did all of this every day, and I thought that's just how it should be. Many people think that, Susan said. And I thought so too, until your father left, and I was on my own. That's when I realized how much he did, even though I thought I was the only one running the whole house. Mark wiped his hands and sat opposite his mother. You know what the scariest thing is? A friend at work recommended this separate budget to me. He lives that way with his wife. And I thought it was fair. Everyone for themselves. But I didn't think Sarah would take it literally. I thought she would continue to do everything as usual, and I would just be freer to spend my money. So you wanted all the pros without the cons? Susan summed up. Yes, Mark sighed. I was selfish. Sarah showed me that very clearly. Sarah appeared in the doorway. She was in her pajamas, her hair down. Leo's asleep, she announced. Susan, I've made up the sofa bed for you in the living room. Let me know if you need anything. Thank you, dear. Susan stood up and hugged her daughter-in-law. Thank you for not letting my son get completely out of hand. Sarah laughed. I stood up for myself. It just so happened that it benefited everyone. That night, Susan lay in the dark, thinking about how many years she herself had lived in an illusion. She had believed that a wife owed her husband everything by default, to cook, to wash, to bear children, to raise them, to work, and still be grateful that she was even married. But that wasn't true. A family is a partnership, equal and fair. If someone invests more, it should be appreciated, not taken for granted. 2 years later, Susan visited her son again, but now she was met by a different home. Mark himself was cooking dinner while Sarah was at work. He had learned to bake and was proud of it. Leo had grown up and started primary school. Sarah had opened a small online business selling children's clothing and was already earning more than her husband. But now it wasn't a problem. They contributed equally, managed a joint budget, and planned their expenses together. Mom, sit down. I made a roast. Mark smiled, taking a baking tray out of the oven. Susan looked at her son and was happy. That scandal with the separate budget turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to their family. It made Mark grow up, Sarah assert her boundaries, and all of them learned to respect each other. At the table, they talked about plans, about the future, about a new car they wanted to buy on credit. Sarah showed her mother-in-law photos of her new clothing collection. Leo talked about school. Remember that day you arrived, and the fridge was empty? Mark suddenly asked. Of course, Susan chuckled. That was the scariest day of my life, he confessed. I realized I could lose my family because of my own foolishness. You didn't lose it, Sarah said softly. You just finally found it. Susan looked at them and felt a lump in her throat. She was happy. Happy for them, for her grandson, for everything having worked out this way. Sometimes you need to fall to learn how to walk. Sometimes you need to go hungry to understand who has been feeding you your whole life. In the evening, on the train home, Susan looked out the window at the passing lights and smiled. Life is a strange thing. Sometimes the most unpleasant situations lead to the most correct decisions, and an empty fridge can be the beginning of a truly honest family.